warriors, fighters, samurais, knights, the equivalent of send me to the wolves and I'll come back leading the pack. But instead of a pack of wolves, it's a sword. This class is the quintessential experience when it comes to every game. It's just one dude with his sword and then good luck. But as basic as it seems, as unflashy as it might be compared to a sorcerer, a wizard, or other types of classes that you may have in a game, be it tabletop or video, at the end of the day, this most simple of classes, this most simple of archetypes exists because it can do way more than anybody else. It can encapsulate everything from the noblest of heroes to the vilest of villains, unbound by pacts with demons or certain oaths that must be fulfilled. The fighter, the warrior, the soldier, whatever you want to call it, is the perfect class to play. Think about it. It's simple. Anybody can truly play it. You can grab it and just go with it. No problem, no issue. Just start with it. Again, it's not as flashy as other things, but it does its job well, and thanks to the availability of not being constrained by certain elements and aspects, a fighter is capable of being so much more, as I've said. And what makes fighter an even better archetype is that we as humans are so closely related to it, because a fighter is not a paladin to have powers of healing, of holy light. A paladin is not a barbarian or berserker where he just goes into a fury and just starts decimating everything around him. No, regular humans can do that, at least in the case of the second one, without psychoactive drugs, but that's a different story. As humans, we are so close to this because our history is filled with fighters, knights, warriors, and so on, from Miyamoto Musashi all the way to El Cid himself, from the fields of Verdun to Megiddo itself. Our history is filled with warriors, with fighters. We have the concepts, the ideas of warrior societies going back to Indo-European history. We are so connected to the idea of the fighter that we evolved to have sports that are just that, representations of fighting in different forms, from your typical boxing to judo to Brazilian jiu-jitsu to MMA to any combat sport you might think of, including medieval brawls and fights, which are pretty entertaining, to be honest. We have evolved to keep this fighting spirit alive because we are so closely related to it. It might be genetic memory, much like knowing ABBA songs. It might be the Koiro societies of old that have ingrained themselves into us genetically over thousands of generations, to this point where we are keeping the idea and the spirit of warriors, of fighters, still alive. Look at the greatest heroes we have in fantasy, for example. And this example is for everybody. It's not something niche like Elric of Melniboné, who is an elf and a sorcerer at the same time. No, it's something grand. Look at Lord of the Rings. Look at The Hobbit. Our main characters there don't have special powers. They don't know secret codes and sign languages. They can't invoke the elements into their hands. They cannot call upon nature to guide them. What they have is their swords and their shields, their strength, and at the end of the day, only their wits with them. And they go through this perilous journey where they have to deal with dangerous creatures, from giant spiders to orcs to mutated creatures that resemble them but are nothing more than a caricature created by darkness in their image. At the end of the day, our heroes do not call upon the elements. Our heroes take things into their own hands and go forward. Now, of course, Aragorn is a little bit of an exception with his whole bloodline thing, but that's not why we're here. Some might say, oh, Aragorn's de facto a ranger because bows and arrows. Look at the samurai. My favorite example is the samurai. Everybody lives with the idea that the samurai were pretty much knights but in Japan, which is wrong. The katana wasn't used as often, and they were more like archers who used melee more as a last resort when they got close to each other. And that's why I think the idea of an archer fits a fighter or a warrior just as well. You see, Normally we associate rangers with certain spells or minor cantrips and other things like that, and in a way it's not the same, because rangers, everybody thinks of a ranger as just a bowman. In truth, a warrior, a fighter, a creature that fights to survive, uses everything it has around it to obtain that goal, to survive, to become a king, to save the damsel. Everything can be used by the warrior to get his goal, noble or ignoble. But at the end of the day, the warriors pull through. At the end of the day, this closest class, this closest archetype, so close to us as humans, is the true one, is the one we associate most, because we feel it in our body, we feel it in our soul, and it makes sense. Just a man with his weapon against the whole wide world. And there's something that speaks to that. There's something that calls to you. It's something primal that makes this class so attractive, that makes this idea so appealing. Now, some might say that a barbarian archetype fits just as well to this, and I say that it depends on the barbarian. If we look at somebody like Conan the Barbarian, we see that things are not as fantasized as, well, the barbarian class really is nowadays, or you might call it the berserker class. No, Conan, much like Aragon, much like our best friend Bobby B from Game of Thrones, is a warrior. A man with his sword, and a man with his own intellect and own desires and ambitions. And that's what makes the warrior perfect. Because the warrior is this faceless clay that we can mold into any way we want. Some might have the idea that the warrior is a boring archetype at the end of the day, a human warrior. There's nothing unique about it. But what they fail to realize that the purpose of a system is what it does. And the purpose of the warrior is to be that mold that you can create. Of course, it might sound generic to make a noble fighter and so on, but it fits just as well as making him evil. Here's an example. In Vampire the Masquerade, I am a fan and an avid loyalist of the Ventru clan. And you can say it's pretty generic to play him as your regular mafioso, though some would argue that's how you should be playing Vampire the Masquerade to begin with, and I agree with that notion. But let's go back. The Ventru, much like the warrior, can exist in different types of archetypes and ideas. Of course, Vampire the Masquerade acts in an interesting way, because that's a regular human who just happens to be part of a clan. The archetype, well, is out there. It's not as forced upon the collective mentality of people, and because of that, a Ventru can either be your regular goon from New Jersey acting like the Sopranos, or he might try to be like Michael Corleone himself. But at the end of the day, this fits the warrior perfectly. The fighter exists as an archetype to be exactly what a normal human is in Vampire the Masquerade. Moldable to your own desires, perfect for any role you might think of, I guess with certain limitations, because those always have to exist, but it works perfectly. And at the end of the day, the way the warrior, the fighter, calls to us, the way it emboldens us to become creative with the tools we are given, it's also an interesting aspect, and one you don't really see with other classes, I would say. Think about this archetype. The warrior is like chess. You already have the pieces on the board. Now it depends on you to use them properly and to the best of your abilities to make something good out of it. And you might succeed and you might win, or you might fail. What's important is the experience. It doesn't matter if this is World of Warcraft that we're speaking, Dungeons and Dragons. It doesn't matter if it's Pathfinder or any other game, video game, tabletop, whatever you want out there. When you pick this class, you are given the tools. There's no surprise there. It's pretty basic as you may think, and then it falls into your hands to make something out of it. Make something great. Make something marvelous. Make something memorable. Because the warrior is there. It's calling to have its own saga made. It's out there calling for his Cuchulainn-like moment and at the same time. Or you might give it one better. You might give your character a different ending, one that is more happier than just tying yourself to a stone with your own innards. But again, like in chess, whatever the plays, whatever the decisions you make, those fall into your hands. Now I understand that something like, World of Warcraft is a little bit difficult to play that way. World of Warcraft is not a game that's as open as tabletop games are, but still, the way the class exists is also so simple, so easy to understand, so purposeful in what it should do, that again, it acts pretty much in the same way as chess. You have all your options, now play with them. And in a way, this video is a love letter to the most basic of all things in video games. The footmen, the grunts, your punchers, your brawlers, the most simple of idea, a fighter, a warrior, a soldier, a knight, a samurai, whatever you want to call it. At the end of the day, this is what builds societies. This is what created empires. Because, let's be honest, empires are built on the backs of the soldiers that bring the spoils, bleed and die. And at the end of the day, it is their names and memories that remain in history. Most forgotten, some, though more importantly, remembered. As basic as it may seem, with all the options at your disposal, is it really, truly basic? Once the world opens in front of you, is it really just plain? It might be if you want it to, but the options and possibilities created by this archetype are numerous. They're plentiful, and let's be honest, they can be the most fun you ever had in a video game or a normal game. The fact that it's simple to just click and attack some certain creature or deal damage to it is just the outer layer of an archetype that can hold so much and do so much too. Now, I'm a fan of paladins, mages, anything you might think of. I'm a fan of magic users. The ability to turn into giant bears is also very appealing, or casting spells that can destroy buildings and level continents. I love those things just as much as the next person. But what I love truly more is the ability to build with a certain limit of blocks and create something powerful out of that. Now, if the chess analogy isn't really enough, think of it like a game of draft. If you play card games, Magic the Gathering, Yu-Gi-Oh, whatever you might think, Pokemon, Hearthstone, you pick. The idea is to simply crack boosters and make what you can out of the hand you are given. Sealed, I think, is a better example than draft, but that's a different story. And it's the same thing with the warrior. You make the best out of what you got, and you can make something incredible. But again, that all depends on you. This is my love letter to warriors. My love letter to the most simple of classes, and yet the most complex to deal with. Now, of course, I have to beg for likes, comments, and subscribes to help the channel. I'm so close to 3,000, I can probably smell it, so if you can, please help out in whatever way you can. Thank you.